I want to talk more about like design and with this whole macro happening, right? There are 2-3 questions I have, so I'm gonna just throw some curveballs at you, right? I think one question that I have is there's something called design, like designing for product, and there's something called designing for growth, right? Or designing for revenue, right? What is it really? Like I'm like treat me like a 5-year-old. Have no context on design in general, right? And how should I think about it? What's like a layman's term example for this?
Sure. So as a designer, especially if you're starting out, you would think in terms of, okay, I make apps, websites, dashboards. Right? Simple. But then you start thinking about journeys. You're like, okay, from here, somebody comes here, and then there is a click-through rate, there's a conversion rate, there's a sign-up rate. Like, okay, I have to now start thinking about that. Eventually, you start getting to the point where it's like, yeah, there are designers who do end-to-end full journeys. But when you're building these huge products, there are designers who specialize on a specific part. Right? So you might have somebody who's working just on activation.
Okay.
Right? So you're like, I mostly work on onboarding. And yeah, maybe eventually in 6 months I shift. But that is my core problem.
I think my double clicking on this is how does the day of somebody who's in design function changes when they're just designing products, as you said, right? They build like an app, they like this, they like that, versus when they are continuously designing for growth. How would their life change, especially for people who are already into design role and they are going towards where you were at Canada, for example, right? How would you think about that?
Designing for growth is a high accountability, high agency role, right? And maybe the simple way of saying this is you're expected to create outcomes rather than just outputs, right? So it's not enough that you just design a flow and it looks great. You are actually responsible for creating a certain outcome. Now that outcome could be a certain metric, it could be revenue directly, it could be improving the baseline of where we are right now. And it's definitely hard to do as an early designer because you're like, I still don't understand the extent of this.
Sure.
But as you get into those experience levels, you're like, okay, I'm actually going to own this outcome. At that point, the lines between what is a product manager, what is a designer get a little blurry, right? Because at that point, you're kind of driving the vision. You're like, okay, yeah, it's important that our screens look great. It's important that our micro interactions are good. It's important that our brand is communicated through the product. Yeah, sure, our copy needs to be great. But all of this is for nothing if we're not able to get the outcome. These might just be great outputs, but not great outcomes. That is the main difference.
Interesting. You were talking about this. I worked with so many cred designers, right? People are gonna hate me for this when I say this, which is like, I felt like cred design team, what we call cred mafia, is way more accountability than RPMs. Right? I feel like designers do a way better job at doing everything end to end. Like I've worked with some incredible people there, right? Like Harish has built like an amazing team. And they act like, you can't really differentiate between like a business and a product and a designer there, right? Like that's how closely in it. And I can totally imagine how you think about outcomes over outputs. What were like, I'm sure you have like done a lot of arguments in cross teams, right? So I'm not going to ask you who's your favorite person on cross teams. What I'm going to ask you is, what are some of the traits of great growth people or great product people that you have worked in the last few years? And what are some of the traits, like how do they behave and what do, like, maybe I can tweak this question saying, what are some of the traits that they don't definitely have? Like what do they don't exhibit as a great product or a growth person from a designer point of view?
See, I think the biggest trap is having a top-down thinking, where you're like, nahi bro, like मेरे PM ने बोला था मुझे कि हमने ओला में यही किया था और हमें यही करना चाहिए because I have high certainty it's gonna work. And that's a very top-down kind of thinking. You're saying, हाँ bro, Lenny ने newsletter में लिखा था, I want to do that, right? Why? Because you're like, yeah, that's my hero, and if they say it, I want to do the same thing. That's very top-down kind of thinking. And at that point, you will start running into roadblocks because you're like, you know, your variables are different, your users are different, your journeys kind of look different. And yeah, you're trying to force fit something
onto it.
But you are ignoring the reality then, right? Versus the best growth PM and product manager, they're like, okay, let's kind of think bottom up. What are the variables we're playing with? What is our status quo? What is our expected outcome? What are the challenges? And now that we have this map, who needs to do what, right? So this map is of course not something just a PM does or just a designer does, but this is something you can actually do together. And you can be like, hey, this seems like an area we should go into, but let's do prototypes, right? That prototyping culture, having a PM who also understands that, like, hey, let's validate as soon as possible. And you as a designer, you can just do this. Like, you can make these screens and have a prototype that looks very real.
So somebody who's like prototyping first, let's get the minimum version out, let's figure out the data, and then double down on and building like a larger thing.
And maybe not even launch it. By prototype, I mean literally linking a bunch of PNGs, like saying this button takes me to this PNG, like literally within Figma. But you open it on a phone, and to a normal person, it looks like it's the real app, right? And that gives you a good idea because now you've taken something which is in the future,
correct,
right? These multiple parts, and you've brought it to today. And so that gives you a real sense rather than thinking in terms of ideas.
What are some of the other traits that you see that the best PMs or the best growth people, the best marketers, the best business strategy people typically do consistently? Apart from like prototyping, what are other things that they do?
See, I'm not so sure, right? Because I'll be very honest. At Unacademy, projects would start from the design team. There were no product managers for the first 2 years, 1.5 years that I was there. And typically when they came in, their goal was to own a certain metric, right? You're responsible for acquisition, activation, referral. But all 0 to 1, all new stuff started in the design team.
Got it.
So I would say the best answer is get out of the way.
Oh my God.
And then once we figure out, let's align.
Okay.
Right? So knowing when to align and when to get out of the way, super important.
Interesting.
Yeah.
My core reflection working with design was, I think which is at least the team that I worked at Dunzo and at Cred was completely fine if you don't have all the answers, right? I think it's about going into that conversation saying, oh cool, this is what we want to get to, and I want you to put holes into this so that I understand, okay, what's the negative flow that I've not looked at? What's the positive flow that I've not looked at? What is the segmentation? What's like an exit flow that I've not looked at, right?
True.
I think that has worked for me, at least, like I'm on the other side of the table to work with design and really get design on your side, right? Like I think that's very interesting.
And I think for product managers as well as designers both, being okay with like usually when there's uncertainty, it causes discomfort. Because then you're like, okay, I'm entering this territory and I don't know how to navigate it. But being okay with blank canvases, being okay with we don't know, right? Exactly what you said. That's very important.
That works. Okay, awesome.